Hi everybody, this is Angel Arts, and I have another vlog to report on our hopeful journey to fatherhood. Last time we talked a bit about our arduous journey of finding another amazing surrogate after going through 4 others and hoping that this 5th surrogate, as amazing and wonderful as she is, incredible as she is, might be the one that will be able to help us through this journey together. So as of last week, we successfully managed to get to the embryo transfer, which is when you actually take the frozen embryo, thaw it, and then actually place it into the uterus of the carrier. So for those of you who have no idea how all of this works, I'm sure many of you knows how it normally works when you have conception naturally. Obviously, we're not able to do that naturally, which is why we're going through the surrogacy. I thought I would take some time to explain to you a bit about the process so you guys understand what's happening. So leading up to the time of the embryo transfer, our surrogate Kate was given a very strict schedule, like 3 weeks in advance. And this schedule basically instructs her on how to take her medications. So there's a long laundry list of medications, and she has to take certain dosages at certain days, starting certain ones, stopping others at a specific date. It's very specific, and the medications come in the form of pills, they come in this form of injections or shots, and they also come in the form of, I think it's called repositories or some sort, where it's an actual pill that you use an applicator to actually insert it through the vagina. So I'm going to be very clinical. So my mom is a nurse, and so I'm used to being able to talk about these things in a very clinical manner, like the human body and male parts and female parts. So if you're uncomfortable about that, this part of the video is probably not for you. But I am going to start talking about parts of the female genitalia because that is how this process works. So at any rate, what exactly do some of these medications do? So some of the medications include a hormone. I think the medication is called Lupron, that she actually injects into her belly for a few days, and that is supposed to shut down her ovaries so that her ovaries do not release any eggs, because we don't want the release of her eggs to interfere with us trying to go through the pregnancy with the embryo that Colin and I selected. Obviously, you know, she, based on the gestational carrier contract agreement that we had gone through with our lawyers, one of the requirements is she is not supposed to have any sexual relations with anyone during this entire time period, at least not until I don't know how many weeks or months into pregnancy. So, you know, she's not going to get pregnant that way as long as she follows that. But just in case, she's taking the medication in order to shut down the ovaries so that the eggs do not get released. Okay, so that's one of the things she takes. Another thing that she took even prior to the schedule is prenatal vitamins, I think folic acid supplements, and even vitamin D, because all of these vitamins and nutrients are supposed to help get her body ready in a optimal state, in an ideal state, to be able to accept the embryo when we actually do the transfer. Then after she finishes taking the Lupron, that's when she starts taking estrogen. And I believe the estrogen is in pill form, if I'm not mistaken. And estrogen basically helps the uterus lining, the lining on the uterus, start to get thick. And we want a thick uterus because it makes it easier. The thicker the walls of the uterus, the easier it is for the embryo to actually attach or implant onto the uterus once the transfer occurs. Where does estrogen normally come from? I believe, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, if I read correctly, the estrogen does occur naturally in women in general, but I think it certainly becomes released when the when the egg is released from the ovaries. But of course, since we're shutting down the ovaries, that's not happening, so that's why she needs to supplement herself with estrogen as if the ovaries had released that egg. The other hormone that she starts taking after she comes in, because while she's been taking this for like a couple weeks, she actually flew here to see our fertility clinic doctor in person, and they were actually able to check to see how her uterine wall is at that point. And if her uterine wall looks thick enough, then 5 days later will be the actual embryo transfer. And fortunately, when she came in for that appointment, our doctor gave us the thumbs up that everything looked perfect. Her uterus looked absolutely ideal in terms of thickness, so she was definitely good to go. So then once that is done, that's when she immediately starts taking progesterone. And the progesterone, what that does is that it also prepares the uterus, and also, I believe, provides nutrients, again, that will help with the implantation and will help for the embryo to stay like implanted on the uterus so that it continued developing. And I think that when an egg is naturally fertilized in the fallopian tube, I believe what normally happens is that there is a casing around the egg that gets shed. I think it gets shed from the egg, as if I understand it correctly, and that, I don't remember what it's called, but that starts to produce progesterone, and in order to let the body know that, hey, something got fertilized, it's time to get the uterus ready so that this baby has a way to implant itself. And then several weeks later, after the placenta and umbilical cord has developed enough, I think the placenta is the one that ends up producing the necessary progesterone for the duration of the pregnancy, so that the corpus luteum no longer has to produce the progesterone anymore. The placenta is now releasing the necessary progesterone hormone until the birth of the baby. So again, because of the Lupron that she took that shut down her ovaries, that step doesn't actually happen, which is why she needs to take the progesterone shots, the progesterone supplements. And they actually come in two ways. She actually is taking them in two different ways, and I think the reason for that is just to be extra sure that she has enough progesterone in her body, because I think it's very difficult to have too much progesterone. I'm not really sure if it's even possible to have too much progesterone. But the first way and the most effective way is progesterone in oil, which she actually injects unfortunately, this is the one that is the most pain in the butt, literally, because she does inject it into her buttocks area every day, basically for the next like 9 or 12 weeks, assuming that the embryo pregnancy takes, and that's not comfortable at all. It is extremely painful. I've also had to help when she was here. I had to help inject her with this progesterone because it's harder for her to do it by herself. It's a lot easier for somebody else to do it, and normally it tends to be less painful because the person who's doing it has, you know, a little bit more control, easier control than if she were to do it by herself. So that was interesting, considering I had never injected anyone with anything prior to that. So, but apparently, like, the way I did it was hurt less than when she did it by herself, so that was good. So that was one way to get her progesterone. The other way that she gets her progesterone is with those repositories that I was talking about, where they actually get inserted with a instrument that comes with the progesterone capsule, to insert the capsule into her vagina, and that dissolves, the progesterone dissolves in there over time from her body heat. And so I think women can decide to take one or the other, but if they can do both, that's even better. If the women really don't like the idea of injecting themselves every day for that long, they can just do the repositories, but I know many women really don't like them because they're very uncomfortable. So some women prefer the repositories over the injection. Some people prefer the injection over the repositories. They would rather take a shot than having to go through that whole thing where they insert stuff into themselves. Plus, I know that the shot is more effective than the other version. But I guess, again, our clinic wants her to do both if she can do both, and she has. So once all of that is happening, like I said, then we come to the actual embryo transfer. And that was a big day for us because this was such a long time coming, as you can imagine. We had never gone this far before, and this is a big deal because whether it takes or not, because just because the transfer happens doesn't mean it leads to a successful pregnancy, because there's a lot of factors that depends on that, namely the condition of the carrier's body or uterus, the viability and grade level of the embryos that are used, and etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of things that are beyond our control, but everything seems to be as ideal as we possibly could preparing for this. So it was just a big deal for us to reach this point, because after 3.5 years, I feel like we finally caught up and are now on an even playing field by the vast majority of straight couples who are trying to get pregnant the more traditional way, who are able to get pregnant in the more traditional way. I feel like we finally have a even footing with them in terms of our chances of becoming pregnant, possibly even more because we are doing all these hormones, and we had done, you know, the genetic testing and grading system with our embryos prior to it, so arguably you could say that we might have a slightly better chance. But it was a big deal. They showed us a picture of the embryo that was put in. So I had, if you remember before, I had an AA embryo that we were going to use, which is the highest grade embryo, and we were driving, Kate and myself and Colin's sister, because she's just been so incredibly helpful for us this entire process. We were driving to the transfer, making sure that we gave ourselves plenty of time, and gave ourselves, you know, enough time to get there early enough. And we got a phone call while we were driving there from the nurse our nurse point of contact, and she was like, I hope you guys haven't left yet. And she's calling us like 13 minutes before our appointment, and we live 30 minutes away, and she's calling us 13 minutes prior, you know, telling us, oh, I hope you guys haven't left yet. So of course when we hear that, we're like, that's not good. Like, that's not something I want to hear when we're on our way to the transfer. So apparently she said that the embryo, the AA embryo that we had chosen as our first choice, because obviously the higher the grade, the better chances, supposedly, it is for us to reach pregnancy. And I think that was the only AA embryo that we had. That embryo, they had started thawing because it had been frozen. And they said it wasn't unfortunately opening up or hatching the way that they wanted it to. And because of that, they decided to start thawing another embryo, an AB, which is still really good. So the next highest grade embryo that we had, and started thawing that. And because they wanted to try that embryo instead, because the first embryo wasn't responding the way that they wanted it to, it was going to delay the transfer another 2 hours, which again is not the end of the world, but that just made me really nervous, because of course we're wondering, well, what if that embryo isn't opening up or hatching the way they want it? You know, what if we have to delay it to the next morning? What if there was a lot of what ifs. Of course, you know, I was worrying and was a nervous wreck. So I thought, all right, well, we've waited for 3.5 years. I guess I can wait another 2 more hours. And we did. We just kind of hung out. It was still kind of brutal, but it was just 2 hours. And then we came back and they said everything looks fine. The embryo that they had was opening up, and it was actually opening up pretty quickly too. So that's a good sign. I'd like to think it's a good sign if it's opening up pretty quickly in just the 2 hours that they started thawing it. That probably means that it's like it's in a momentum. Like it got momentum, which means it's probably going to get going. So for those of you who don't know what the AB, like how that grading system works, I did a little bit more research just to explain what those letters mean. So when you're looking at the embryo, and they showed us the embryo, this is the AB that they showed us. So this is what was used for the transfer. And I have to say, when I saw this picture for the very first time, I kid you not, I started tearing up. Like, I know it was probably way too soon for me to start getting attached to anything, but just you have to understand, after 3.5 years, I feel like I deserve to have some small victory celebrations, even if it ends up not panning out later on. I need to celebrate a little bit. Let me celebrate a little bit. So like, I was looking at this, which could eventually be my potential child, and it was just really emotional. I just started breaking down crying. But anyway, back to what I was talking about with the grading system. So the way that the grading system works is that there are 2 parts of the blastocyst. This is like, I think, day 5 after it's fertilized. After day 5 after it's fertilized, the embryo has 2 different parts. There's the part that there's a portion of cells in the embryo that will eventually become the baby itself, the child itself. And then the second half is the cells that eventually turns into the placenta and the umbilical cord, basically the lifeline of the baby or the child. So both are important. So if you can look at it, the top portion of this, if I understand this correctly, the top portion of the embryo, that is the portion that will eventually turn into the baby. And then the bottom portion, that is the portion that will eventually turn into the placenta and umbilical cord. And so when you're giving it a grade of AB, A means that the first letter is for the portion that turns into the baby. So if it's A, it means you have a lot of cells in that embryo that will hopefully develop into a baby. And then if you have B, you have a pretty good amount of cells, And then if you have C, there's like a few amount of cells, probably not super ideal for a transfer. And then same thing for the second letter. So in the second letter, if it's an A, that means there's a lot of cells for the portion that transforms into the umbilical cord and the placenta. B means there's a pretty good amount of cells, and then C means probably not ideal. So I had an AB, so the part that was going to turn into the baby has a lot of cells, which is good, and the parts that turn into the umbilical and placenta has a good amount of cells. So it's still good, it's still very good. And again, I'd like to hope that that being told that this was hatching, opening up, was good meant that the cells are growing, the cells are multiplying and splitting the way that they're supposed to. That's the hope. So, so then they took Kate in. Of course, we said our good lucks and gave everybody a big hug, and she went in, and the actual process of the transfer actually goes relatively quickly. You know, there's no anesthesia that's required. It's not a surgery. You are given the option of taking Valium if you want, Valium being a muscle relaxer, because that may make the surrogate a lot more comfortable, a lot more relaxed, because, you know, stress is a big part of becoming pregnant. If you are really, really full of stress, that can affect how successful you are at becoming pregnant. So we did everything we can to make her relax as possible. And so for those of you who are not women, all the males out there probably don't know what gynecologists normally do. Well, basically, again, I'm going to be very clinical right now. The carrier ends up sitting on a bed, basically removes the clothes down there, obviously, because that's the only way that they can get anything into the uterus. And then there are tools that are used to clamp open the female area, to clamp open the vagina. Then there is a tool called a catheter, I think is how it's explained to me. The catheter that actually is going to contain, it will take the embryo, and the catheter is used, and I think that they have either a sonogram or a camera or something guides the doctor as they put the catheter into the uterus, and guide it so that they are able to deposit or transfer the embryo at as an ideal spot as possible on the uterus, so that the embryo will hopefully continue developing and hatching, and hopefully the parts that will turn into the umbilical cord and the placenta will implant and connect to the very readily thick uterine wall that we've been preparing for using all the hormones. And that actually goes relatively quickly. For Kate, it was practically painless, according to her, and like I said, it went really fast. But once it happens, you know, she has to lie on her back for about 10-15 minutes just to, you know, just no sudden movements, just to let everything just settle the way it needs to settle. And then she was good to go. And so what is next up? What's next now is, you know, she has to stay rested. So she actually stayed here an extra day. She didn't go home, fly back to her home, because she's from out of town. She doesn't live in the state. She stayed with us for an extra day before finally leaving the day after, and just took it easy, because she's not supposed to like do anything like super active, which was difficult for her because she's a very active and athletic person. Like when she arrived here, she really wanted to hit the gym. When it was the morning of the transfer, she really wanted to hit the gym again, because she knew that she would have to like really take it easy and not do any major exercising, at least for the next week and a half. No picking up anything more than 10 pounds, things like that. So a pregnancy test is going to be taken a week and a half later, which as of this recording is tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to get our first official pregnancy test to find out whether or not this pregnancy took. And according to the doctor, it's a 50% chance. I'd like to believe our chances are a little bit higher because, again, I think Kate is such a great candidate. I think that she's did everything that she needed to do. They checked her hormone levels earlier this week, a few days ago, so like almost a week after the transfer, they check her hormone levels just to see if they need to adjust her dosage of any of the medications that she's taking. And when they did, they said everything looked fabulous and ideal. Like, we're talking 5-star like hotel. She's got like 5-star hotel ideal uterus thing going on right now. So pretty much we've provided the most ideal environment for this baby on a silver platter. So I'm going into this just knowing that we did everything that we could to give this the best chance of success. And there is really nothing else that we could have done. And so it's pretty much in God's hands as far as I'm concerned. Like, there's nothing else that we can do but wait and see how the pregnancy test goes. And how the pregnancy test works, for those of you who don't know, it is a blood test. And what they're looking for is something called HCG. H as in hamburger, C as in cat, and G as in George. The HCG levels in our blood system, because what happens is when the embryo implants successfully onto the uterus and starts forming the umbilical cord and placenta, that starts to release HCG. And that actually is what a take-home pregnancy looks for when a woman tries to take the test by peeing on it. The urine, if you are a certain amount of time along in your pregnancy, the home pregnancy test looks for HCG levels in your urine. Now, it's not super accurate, not nearly as accurate as it is taking this blood test, and this blood test I think can pick up on the HCG levels earlier on. So this pregnancy test is taking approximately 10 days after the transfer. They say that with a blastocyst embryo, which is again has grown for 5 days, with a blastocyst embryo, you could start seeing traces of HCG in the blood after 7 days. So I think we're just taking 10 days just in case, you know, it needed a little bit more time for the HCG levels to rise up. And so we'll find out tomorrow if we're pregnant. And I'm excited and terrified at the same time. I think I'm more terrified than excited, to be correctly honest. Worst case scenario, if it didn't take, then obviously we'll just have to try again. But obviously, it would just be so ideal and so amazing if we didn't have to go through this whole ordeal again, because we would have to go through the medications again, through the schedule. She'll have to fly back here. You know, it's less convenient for Kate to have to come back again, you know, once or twice, and then go through the transfer again, and then we have to wait 10 more days again after that. So it's another torturous 10 days. So things would be so much nicer and so much easier if it just took. If they just told us tomorrow, you're pregnant. And of course, and that would be a huge victory for us. It's, of course, doesn't get us completely out of the miscarriage zone, but it's a huge, huge step, because, again, as long as Kate continues taking her medications, because she has to continue taking her progesterone, and that is supposed to greatly, apparently, help prevent miscarriages from happening, so that should give us a bit of an advantage over other couples who might be trying to get pregnant more traditionally at this stage. And Kate, like, she knows how to take care of her body. She knows how to listen to her body when she's pregnant. So I am, if we end up getting the green light tomorrow, I'm like 99% confident that we're gonna be fine. Obviously, like, there's always a chance, but it would still be huge, huge victory. Because after confirming a pregnancy tomorrow, then the next thing is to try to go for another test like a month later, I think, something along those lines, a month-ish later, to check for confirmation of heartbeat, because apparently you can get a heartbeat in a relatively short amount of time, and once you can get the confirmation of heartbeat, then the dangers of having a miscarriage significantly lowers, like to 90 or 95% or something like that. 95% of a success of not having a miscarriage once you reach the confirmation of heartbeat. Again, like, this is just stuff that I'm reading. Many of you who are in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong with anything I've said medically. I'm just telling you about, you know, what I think I've learned up to this point. So use the things that I'm saying as much as possible with a grain of salt, but I'm sure people down in the comments will correct me if necessary, if I got something completely wrong. So, you know, she'll continue taking her progesterone, and this is like, if you guys are at all, like, if you're religious, keep praying, please. If you're not religious, cross your fingers, give positive vibes, good lucks, whatever it is, good energy, positive energy, because there's just, I really want to meet you. I want to meet you. Your other dad really wants to meet you. And we've worked so hard. We've worked so hard for 3.5 years, put in so much money into this, put so much time, so much effort, gone through so much emotional, draining headaches, just for you. There's so many things I want to show you. There's so many things I want to teach you. There's so many video games I want to introduce you to. There's so many viewers I want to introduce you to. There's so many experiences and trips and bedtime stories and new food and toys and Disney World and Harry Potter Land, and there's so many things I want to expose you and teach you and sing to you and feed you and love you. Just give us a chance. Please, just give us this chance to do it for you, please. We've done everything we could, and we just need you to help us out and meet us in between, because we can't do this alone, you know? The ball's in your court now. It's out of our control. We can't do anything. Kate can't do, you know, she can do stuff, obviously, but at the end of the day, kiddo, it's all on you at this point, at least for the next 9 months. It's pretty much you and Kate. But Kate, again, can't do it on her own. You gotta help her too. I mean, this is a team effort here. Like, if we're gonna be, that's what being a family means. It's a team effort. And like, I promise you that if you just reach out and keep growing strong and just be the best that you can be through this whole process, I promise you, after 9 months, we will take care of everything else, because I will love you and care for you, and Colin will love you and care for you. We have a whole network of friends and families that are just waiting to meet you, and I hope you want to meet us too. But you gotta help us out. You gotta meet us there halfway, so that I can finally say hi, and I can finally, by that point, we'll do our part. It'll be on us for 18 years and beyond. I just need you to meet us halfway in between, okay? Please. aggravating. I'm excited and terrified. I'll see you guys in the next vlog. Until then, everybody, love yourselves and love each other.